Hey everyone, what's going on? Ian here. Today I'm with Anthony, and this is our first edition of Separated by Two Pillows. So in this episode, we are going to be covering some nutrition questions that I put up, and you guys replied to in my story, asking some stuff about nutrition, so we're going to do our best to answer. He's a nutrition coach and been a PT for a long time. I've been a PT for nearly 10 years, so we're going to try and share some of this knowledge with you guys, and hopefully you guys can apply it given the circumstances we are in at the moment.
Yeah, definitely this is not, an every year occurrence or a lifetime occurrence for most people. So we've gotten some very interesting questions, and I think the first one that came up on the feed was, should I even care about nutrition right now? So Ian, should I even care about nutrition right now?
It's obviously a testing and trying times. Like obviously at the moment we are practicing our social distancing with pillows. So these are the quarantine pillows. That being said, should you care about nutrition? At this point in time, I think it's absolutely crucial because as a coach and a trainer, you start to understand the impact that nutrition not only has on your psyche, your well-being, your body, and your cognitive performance. I think it's a great time. And also, like, you are gonna have time on your side so you can make more thoughtful decisions. When we're coaching people on nutrition, especially busy people, think about that decision fatigue and that cognitive oversight you have to have in that busy day-to-day life. Now you're sitting at home, you have all this extra time. It's a good opportunity to educate yourself and build skills that you can use moving forward to ultimately help you get great results. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think realistically, you could actually say like maybe this is something where you lose the Corona 15 because you have total control over everything you're doing right now. So like most people, the biggest thing that they say is like, I don't have time to like meal prep or make food. You have all the time in the world right now. So like, should you be focused on nutrition right now? I feel like that's one thing where you could actually hammer this down because you actually finally have the time to take control of it.
Yeah, and like we touched on before, is like building those skills. So if you have the time, you can start to understand portions. You can start to understand quality food choices. You can use this as an opportunity to educate yourself. And education is kind of the long-term solution because you can make informed decisions. And once you get that down, and you don't have to rely on people like us or a coach, and you develop that, I guess, personal accountability, you'll be unstoppable with any health, fitness, and nutrition goals you have. So.
Yeah, I think the question that's going to arise from this is, well, I'm sitting at home all the time and like I have all these food options right now. And I think it's more of what's called cognitive oversight, where you actually have to think about what you're putting in your body and say like, well, this probably isn't the best choice for me right now, especially because if you don't have a big space and the ability to move around and exercise, because most of the gyms are closed and you might not have a gym in your house or just exercise equipment in general, this is where you're going to have to say no a lot. And I always refer, with the people that I work with, it's always a battle between saying no and saying yes. And there's actually a very unhealthy balance between no's and yeses to actually live a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
So just imagine it's, you're in the grocery store, you haven't eaten all day. This is when you make the worst decisions. This is when you pick up the foods that you probably shouldn't say yes to. And when you're in the house and you're going through the cupboard, it's going to be the same thing because you're probably going to be bored if you don't have a lot of stuff to do at home. And that's generally when you start to say yes to highly palatable or things that taste good, just because you feel like you have nothing better to do. Do you want to add something to that?
Well, I guess my next question is, how do you teach people the difference between actual physical hunger and boredom? Because we've all been caught in that loop before where we're just sitting down and, part of our brain just takes over and we're like, oh, maybe I should grab a snack. And we grab a snack and we start, and because we're not kind of conscious of what we're doing, maybe we have some TV on in the background, maybe we're just doing something and being distracted while we eat, we just consume a lot of calories.
Yeah. Well, something that I do personally, like I have to ask myself this, is if I'm really hungry, how appetizing does chicken, broccoli, and rice sound right now with no condiments whatsoever? And if I go like, do you know what, I could really go for some chicken, rice, and broccoli right now, I'm probably pretty hungry. But if I go like, no, I don't want to eat that right now, and like, realistically, like I want to go for like a really, really good sandwich with lots of cheese on it, or like a pie or something like that. That to me sounds more like a craving, and you just kind of like put those barriers in place where you kind of have a question that you ask yourself, and if it's a yes, then maybe you are actually hungry. But most of the time, we're going to be driven by our wants rather than our needs.
So what self-awareness question can we ask ourselves if we want to kind of decipher between boredom and actual physical hunger?
There's a couple different techniques that I use. One thing is that there's a misconception that a lot of times, like when you're thirsty, you're hungry. You'd have to be extremely thirsty for that to be happening. That's just a general misconception. But if it's just boredom, a lot of times, or maybe it's just like you feel like you need something. A lot of times, like if you have, like I don't promote the use of like sugar-free pops and stuff like that, but they do come in handy. So if you have like a Coke Zero or something, you drink that and that kind of kills like your hunger, then you know that it's probably bored and you just wanted something sweet, something to kind of make you feel good, or just something to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, it could be like literally like you are getting hungry. So this is kind of deviating from the question a little bit, but a lot of times what we get people to do is, drink 500 milliliters or like close to a liter of water before you eat. And a lot of times that's going to stretch your stomach out, and you're just not going to feel the effects of hunger so much.
Yeah. So I'm similar. I've used that technique as well. Kind of decipher. Okay, I'm gonna have like a tall glass of water, and I'm gonna wait 20 minutes and see if I'm still hungry. And kind of an intuitive approach is basically what we talked about. Is just ask yourself, am I bored right now, or am I actually hungry? So it's just, again, like we talked about, how can we develop self-awareness? How can we kind of cultivate this consciousness to make good decisions in a time where it is easy to eat out of boredom?
Yeah, and I think that finding creative outlets or just things that entertain you. For example, like if I personally enjoy, like I'll play guitar or like maybe some music production, something of that nature. So if I can just like focus for about 5 minutes and sit down and start doing that, a lot of times like I'm not gonna even think about being hungry anymore because I'm actually doing something, like I'm entertained. It's not the same thing as like watching a show, because you don't have to be actively engaged in watching a show. But if I sit down and I start doing something that's like cognitively engaging and all I can think about is food, I'm probably pretty hungry.
Yeah. I would say my number one tip, and obviously at this point in time it's quite hard, is like try not to keep that stuff in your house. Your brain is just not wired for temptation around food. So if you have like chocolate, or you have your favorite snack that's accessible within footsteps, it's usually pretty hard until we come up with like a shock collar that goes off when you go near the chocolate, unless you're allowed. You're probably gonna do the crazy lap, which I call. So the crazy lap is you go take a lap to the pantry, you open the cupboard, you look at it, you might even touch the outside of the wrapper, and then you go sit back down. And you think about it, you're like, no, I shouldn't. I know I shouldn't do this. And then it just sits in the back of your mind, and then you take another step up, and then all of a sudden you've let yourself get so hungry, you go back and consume that entire snack or treat, and then it creates a bit of a guilt loop because you know you shouldn't have done it. So my best advice, and it's obviously hard at this point in time, is keep those kind of hyper palatable, which is like easy to overconsume calories outside your reach.
Yeah, environment means so much, and if your environment is filled with these snacks, you're probably going to get yourself into trouble. Especially like if this goes on for a couple weeks, like eventually you're going to get into those snacks unless you develop the skills to just have small amounts at a time. And like everybody knows that they have levels of snacks, like there's just certain things that you can't help yourself with. And then there's other things where you can actually have some and kind of put it away. So probably don't keep your favorite snacks in the house during this time if you don't think that you're going to be able to control yourself. And don't kid yourself when you go to the store and say like, yeah, I'll probably be able to portion this out.
Yeah.
Let's get real with ourselves here on what we're able to do.
Yeah, well, another good thing, we have similar but kind of different approaches to nutrition. And one thing is where I find it super valuable when I coach people on macros and calories is, I'm like, yeah, if you've eaten well most of the time, like if you can fit it in your calories, put the snack in there. It kind of puts the governor on you because you can have a bit, but you're limited to the amount of like portion that you can have of that, because it just will not fit up your calories, and it will kind of take away from the macronutrient ratios that we recommend as coaches. So How do you find clients and their ability to put this stuff in to their macros?
Well, I think tracking, and this is the one really important thing. Even if you're not even on macronutrients, you're just kind of watching the calories. Just the whole process of putting it in and tracking it will decrease your total calorie intake. Because if you start putting stuff in and those calories start to climb, you start to see that high number. And if you kind of know whereabout you should be gaining weight, then once you start approaching that number, you start to make better decisions. And then the second you stop tracking is the second that kind of all hell breaks loose. And then you might overconsume by 500, 1,000, 2,000 calories in a day. And then obviously that's not going to be good for long-term health. This will lead perfectly into our next question.
Okay, next question. Sorry, I'd like to just kind of highlight and comment. If we talk about one topic, we've done this because we've sat on this couch many times having discussions, obviously not recorded, but say for example, if it's protein, we can spend an hour talking about protein. So I just want to apologize if we get very long-winded. We just pay attention to details because after coaching for a long time, you start to understand that everyone's individualized in the way that you can approach. So there's always going to be some caveats to the, with how we approach topics. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you guys are like, holy smokes, these guys between a pillow are getting long-winded with one short question.
Correct. So the next question works perfectly into what we were just talking about is I have no motivation and think that quarantine is going to make me fat. Well, with what we just discussed, if you have a lot of highly palatable snacks in your house and you have zero self-control and you are overeating calories, then yes, that's probably very likely. Like you're going to put on some weight over this quarantine time. So I guess it really comes down to how much are you able to get up and move around while you're in your house. And it's easy enough, like everybody has their phone on them, like you have everyone's phone has a step tracker in it. And just a number to throw at it, you guys, like in order to regulate your body weight on a day-to-day basis, you need to be getting in 7,500 steps per day. So it's pretty much, it's pretty eye-opening when you start tracking your steps and all of a sudden you see like, oh, I've only moved 2,000 steps today.
And well, that's one thing that he highlights. I think one of the best things to develop intuition, because unless you're like hyper in tune with your body, you're not going to know. But technology can confirm that. Be like, oh, maybe I'm not eating enough. Okay, well, let's track. Yes, I'm severely undereating. Oh, maybe I'm eating too much. Okay, well, let's track. Let's get a baseline for what you're consuming. Okay, well, yeah, I was eating too much. Oh, I don't know if I'm moving enough. Okay, well, let's check our steps. And again, kind of developing that intuition with the fusion of technology is a great adjunct to, what you can and what you might already be doing. One thing I want to comment on motivation, okay? I like to use a lot of either like Socratic questioning, which is instilling critical thinking in my clients, or kind of forward-thinking questions. So let's just think about the future, okay? So we can kind of imagine the future if we lack the motivation, if we start to pack on the weight. What does that look like in 3 months for you personally? Like, so if you're just gonna give up and kind of tap out because you're in quarantine and you're just gonna allow yourself to get fat, what does that look like?
Yeah, like worst case Ontario, like what happens if we're not allowed to go outside for 2-3 months? Like, what does that look like?
Are you just gonna, kind of give up and put on all this weight, and then all of a sudden you're going to be in a rush to take it off and you try and do something extreme? The best thing to do is get on top of it while you have the time.
Yeah. So
I think the motivation is also comes down to what do you want. So like we talk about processes when we're onboarding clients, is like it's a big thing. It's just setting some goals, and for us, we like to focus on some process. So your simple goals, if you're stuck in quarantine, could be like, again, achieve a step goal.
Yeah.
Eat, 3 healthy meals, and then if you're gonna have some treats, track it.
Yeah.
Maybe like get some good quality sleep.
Yeah, there's an interesting question answered here, and I want to highlight it just because Ian brought this up previously. Is something that I hear all the time is I'm not eating enough calories and I'm gaining weight. And like if you're sitting around the house and maybe you're not moving a lot, maybe you're not eating enough calories, or that's what you think. And unfortunately, that is the worst lie that the fitness industry has been told, or the nutrition industry has been told, is that I'm not eating enough, I'm holding on to my weight. That is not true. That would be defying the first law of thermodynamics.
The energy.
Energy in, energy out, or energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So something that's really important to highlight when you're at home is understanding that if you are not eating a lot of food, what ends up happening is your body is going to auto-regulate how much you move throughout the day. It's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or just essentially how much like you move around, fidget, move your hands. As you can see, I'm a hand talker and I fidget a lot. At the opposite end to this, I know this is a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about, but if you've ever talked to anybody who's a bodybuilder, they will tell you they actually have to think about not moving or not doing anything during the day, because they start ingesting so many more calories that their body starts up-regulating how much they move. So I have a friend who was eating 3,500 calories, not gaining weight. He got all the way up to 5,000 calories, wasn't gaining weight, and he literally had to focus on sitting on the couch and not move so he could gain weight, because he would move, like he would actually get up while he was watching TV and pace around the room because he had so much calorie intake, so his body was trying to burn that off.
Yeah, I think where people kind of misinterpret like what you said, oh, I'm not eating enough and I'm gaining or I'm not losing weight, is like you have to understand the set point. Okay, so like what does your body get used to taking in? And it's going to heavily adjust to those amount of calories. Your body's incredibly adaptive and resilient.
Yeah.
So say for example you've been under eating for a long time. Yeah, you've been eating so little that your body has got used to being able to use those amount of calories, and what happens to your BMR?
Like your BMR drops drastically. So
what is what is a BMR?
So basal metabolic rate is essentially how many calories your body's going to burn during the day.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So
for like basic bodily functions.
Basic bodily functions. And then on top of that, then you have exercise, and you have that thing we call non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT. You have the thermic effect of foods, your body using energy to break down food. Like all these things contribute to how many calories you burn in a day, like your total daily energy expenditure. So I guess what happens is when you go really, really low for a long time, that BMR is going to drop way, way down. So inherently, when you're actually dieting and you're trying to like lose a lot of weight, your BMR is going to drop over time. And then we generally want to combat this with either more exercise or like moving around and walking around to kind of offset that. So the long-term plan with any type of diet plan would actually be move more and eat more, but still be in a deficit. So,
yeah, correct.
So if we could, in a perfect scenario, we could actually have somebody just increase the amount of steps they have per day, increase their exercise intensity in some cases. Sometimes that backfires because you get really tired and then you don't move, and then that drops your NEAT down. It's kind of this cycle of just managing calories in, calories out, because that is the biggest thing when it comes to weight loss and weight gain.
Yeah, and like we talked about before, it can kind of get lost in translation, and I think some people need to understand context, like especially from my background. Like I worked a lot with athletes, and you need to be able to perform at a certain level and lose weight. So it becomes a completely different story than just weight loss. It's like, how can we optimize performance, still recover, but lose body fat? So like I'm a big guy on quality. I understand, flexible dieting, especially if you're just in it for general weight loss, but like that's just one thing to understand is context. So, like we'll approach things differently based on the scenario. It's like, imagine if you have a toolbox, right? And you only have a hammer in that, like how are you supposed to unscrew a light bulb? You know what I mean? So we have taken a lot of time to develop all these different tools, and then based on the scenario, we just pick the right tool. Yeah. So, I mean, fasting works, macros works, flexible dieting works. It just, again, it depends on the context, who you are, what your goal is, and where you're at, so.
Yeah. I think that where a lot of people get lost in, like the question we asked before is like calories in, calories out is, I think when you look at things, it's actually how well are you tracking? If you have more processed foods, are those processed foods actually have the calories in them that they report? So that's a lot of times when we increase food quality and we eat better foods, it's a lot more accurate in how many calories we're intaking. And then the food volume's more, so people perceive they're eating more, but they're actually not eating more.
Yeah, well, anyone who's dieted, like you've been down to 6% body fat, like I've done quite a bit of dieting. The biggest thing is like, how can I not be super hungry? Yeah. So food quality matters because you're gonna feel a level of satiation. Like if you have refined carbohydrates and your blood sugar is swinging left, right, up, down, fucking everywhere, you're gonna be hungry and cranky. You know what I mean?
And then that's generally when you have these unreported calories. You don't like a case in point. I had this client and they were reporting perfect macros and calories, and they were doing all the right things, and they just weren't losing weight. And I actually backdoored a conversation to his wife, and I was like, "Hey, I want you to watch your husband for the next week."
Yeah.
Because I know that he's intaking calories that he doesn't think he's intaking. And lo and behold, there's this little nut dish, and it sits between like basically where his office is and the kitchen, and he literally did not recall taking nuts from this dish. And we're talking like probably a handful to 2 handfuls of nuts a day. And if you guys know how many calories are in cashews, if you got 2 handfuls of cashews, that could be your whole calorie deficit for the day. So I think it really comes down to adherence, and even if this is an interesting thing, even if you weren't tracking everything perfectly, but you did that the exact same every single day, and you were consistent with that, you could actually drop your calories down and see the weight loss if you were consistent in your inconsistency.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But at the end of the day, we want to be, if we're actually trying to maintain or lose weight in these circumstances, and you don't know how many calories you're taking, you should just get a scale, make sure that you're tracking everything, and then just look at your weight fluctuations throughout the week. And you want to take the weekly average of like at least 3 measurements in a week, and you should either see like fluctuations happening, but the baseline one average compared to the next week's average be exactly the same, or see a decrease, depending if you want to go and maintain or if you want to lose.
Yeah, and like obviously he's got a system. He works with, I don't know, how many clients are you working with in a week?
And anywhere between 40 and 60.
Yeah, so you're looking at a lot of nutrition logs. You're collecting a lot of data. One thing for like the biggest thing to understand if you're watching this and you're a coach is like you can have the perfect plan, but what strategies can we put in place to, one, hold people accountable, and then 2, get people to follow the plan. So we might kind of differ on points, but the end result is the same thing. It's like, how can we get people to follow the plan? How can we get people to stay accountable? Because I mean, there's a ton of literature and research out there, but it's different when you're dealing with free living humans who have access to basically unlimited amounts of food all the time. Yeah. So that's the question, is like, how do we get people to stick to a plan? And I feel like you've probably narrowed down some pretty good strategies to do that.
Yeah. And like, it doesn't matter what program you're on. You could be on any side of the spectrum. You could be on a vegan diet, you could be on a keto diet, you could be eating just meat. But at the end of the day, whatever your goals are based on your caloric intake. And then from that, like, you can have a plan in place, but are you adhering to that plan? That's really it. It's just like adherence is the number one thing that's going to get you exactly what you want.
And that's the thing too. Like, I've had people do horrendously on a ketogenic diet, and I've had people do amazing on a ketogenic diet. I've had people do and lose body fat on 300 grams of carbs. I've had people gain a ton of weight. Yeah. So it just, again, it actually comes down to adherence. Like, sometimes people's brains feel better, they control their appetite better, they've got regulated blood sugar, they're kind of getting rid of some of that glutamate toxicity on it, like, low carb keto style. And then other people is like, they can't recover, they're constantly hungry, and they just can't stick to it. So again, it's just about, most important is understanding quantity and making sure we're not overshooting that, which is your calories for fat loss.
Yeah. And that is going to bring us to the next question of, what if I'm watching Netflix all day? Should I eat less?
Yeah, I've got a good analogy, and this is what I tell people. And I like to use a lot of analogies when I'm coaching. Imagine if you've got, a parked car in a garage and you're pumping it full of gasoline. Like, there's going to be some overfill or some spillage in that gasoline tank, right? If you've got a high-powered race car, which you're driving fucking 300 kilometers an hour around a track, you're going to require more fuel and high-quality fuel. You know what I mean? So just understanding eating according to that activity level, especially at this point in time. Yes, if you're sitting down and not moving, like you talked about before, you're barely getting any activity in, and you're eating out of boredom, and you're sitting down watching Movies all day, yes, you're most likely going to gain a bit of weight, and you probably need to eat a little bit less and move a bit more.
Yeah. And that brings us to our last question, which is like kind of where should I start with this? Because you might be like, oh, well, I have to eat less, but
Yeah.
like how much less?
What's the first thing that you do with the client? What questions are you asking?
Like the questions that I'm going to generally ask is like, what is your activity level? What have you done in the past, especially for like what diets have you done in the past? If someone doesn't have any like tracking history whatsoever with their nutrition, they don't understand what their baseline is. And they don't, maybe someone has done just a whole foods diet and they've done portions and they know how much or how big of portions they needed in order to maintain weight while they were still like going to the gym, doing that stuff. You wouldn't have to technically ask them to track their calories because they've actually gone through this process before. You would just ask them to eat moderately less than what they did before because they know what their portion sizes are. But if you don't understand portion sizes, you haven't really had any diet history in the past, probably the place that you should start is either start with 3 to 4 meals, relatively the same size, if you don't want to actually weigh and measure your food. And kind of the guidelines would be like a palm size of protein, maybe like a small fist size of carbs, and then the rest of your plate's gonna be mostly vegetables. Like we're gonna go like half a plate of vegetables, a small portion of protein, a small portion of carbs, and I'm gonna tell people probably 3 to 4 meals a day, but then you have to have some form of measurement. So whether or not that's you're weighing yourself like 3 times a week or more, taking body measurements, and the other thing is like you can just track your macros, but then we still need some form of feedback of how we're doing, and that could even be in the form of pictures of like taking pictures week to week and seeing if there's any changes happening.
Yeah, and like for me, usually I'll start with like, I guess we can even dial it back a little bit more, and depending on how you coach or how you approach your fat loss is like, why are we here? Like, why are you here? Why do you want to lose weight?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, once you understand that, and once I understand someone's motivation, I can tap on that continually when I'm coaching them. So, oh, you told me you wanted to do this, and this is why you want to do this. You came and shared that with me. Like, okay, well, let's tap on that. Like, what's your motivation? For some people, it might be like, I want to, be fit and ripped so I can pick up chicks. Obviously not the best motivation, but if I understand that about, let's just call him Joe. If I understand that about
Chad, actually.
Yeah. If I understand that about Chad, I can be like, come on, man, like, and just tap on that motivation. If your goal is to have more energy so you can spend time with your kids and be, a role model for your kids, like I'm gonna bring that up when I'm coaching you. So
yeah.
I think like understanding why you want to do something, and then the way that I'm on board is obviously I don't coach as many people as him at the same time, so I can be very, very kind of, I only usually do about 10 people, so I can be kind of very, very thoughtful and precise and just pick the biggest leverage point.
Yeah.
So just understanding leverage points for people. So if someone's eating too much, like, okay, let's work on quantity control. If someone's got a shitty micronutrient profile, like they're not eating a lot of quality foods, okay, let's double down on quality. And usually those things will resonate the loudest on not only how they feel, but how you're performing in the gym and ultimately like how you're looking as well. So
yeah. And there's definitely a difference between weight management and health.
yeah.
Because you can eat whatever you want realistically and control caloric intake and lose weight. But are you getting the micronutrients? Are your cells healthy? That's going to dictate how you feel. That's going to actually play into hunger signaling as well. So if you have really poor food intake, most people actually end up hitting a breaking point because they're probably not getting the micronutrients they need, and then they're going to be hungry all the time because their body's asking for those nutrients.
Yeah, I guess like we talked about context. You're with fitness in general, you're gonna probably have one of 3 goals. Sometimes like I like to manage all 3. You're either gonna want to look better, you're either gonna want to feel better, and you're either gonna want to perform better. So you have kind of performance, health, and aesthetics, or I guess what you call weight loss or body composition, right?
Yeah.
Can you focus on all 3 without sacrificing some of the others? Well, look, if you're a high-level bodybuilder, there's going to be a sacrifice with your health at some point, right? If you're into insane, crazy longevity strategies that require ridiculous fasting, you're probably going to suffer in performance and body composition. But how can we kind of merge all three if you're, just someone who's looking to be healthy, fit, look and feel and perform better? Like, that's kind of what we do, unless we're working with athletes or unless we're working with health clients, like on a detox protocol, or unless we're working with, strictly weight management.
Yeah, and to the point earlier, I think that's some strategy that you can implement on your own. A lot of people, you ask them, okay, so like, what's your overarching goal? And they'll be like, oh, well, I want to lose weight. So I call it the 5 why protocol. So if you ask yourself why 5 times to that question, you're probably going to peel off that superficial layer. And if you can't answer that, like if you can't answer 2 or 3 whys, then you should probably just stop lying to yourself and figure out exactly why you want these goals. And it's a personal experience of actually understanding, like, okay, what are my drivers for wanting these things?
Yeah. I think another misconception is coaching, where like basically people take photos of themselves and we send them macros. Like, it is the furthest thing from the truth if you want to coach nutrition, because you have to understand people. You have to understand, motivation. You have to understand, I would say, a decent amount of psychology. I'm obviously not a psychologist, but you have to understand human behavior at the most fundamental level.
Yeah, like if all my clients literally just followed what I told them to do, by week 2 or 3, they'd be cruising and they'd lose 2 pounds a week.
And you just do nothing.
I wouldn't have to do anything as a coach. Yeah, and I wouldn't spend 35 minutes on a single email with a client like I did with basically all my clients today, because everyone's freaking out right now. So it's interesting. I call him, no one's gonna know, Stan the Man. He's just crushing it right now. He's like groovy cruising. He usually travels like 10 to 20 hours a week, like flying in and out everywhere. So he's at home right now and he's like, this is the easiest things I've ever been. He's crushing it. And then you have other people whose kids are at home all the time and they're not used to that. And, maybe their relatives are now living in their basement and now they can't work out in the basement. Like, maybe this is a specific individual that was having a tough time this week. But
yeah,
if everyone can just follow the protocol, that's easy, but it's actually just managing all the other stuff. And environment plays a big role in that. And I'm lucky that I live in a place with Ian, and basically our fridge is just the stuff that we cook, and we don't have these foods kicking around that we have to like deal with, like really palatable foods.
No, and again, I guess just to add another and further and deeper layer onto what he said is, if you're at a point in time when you're stressed, what's one of the best things to do to alleviate stress is create structure for yourself. The more structure and regimented you are, the more secure your brain is going to feel in its environment. So I think from like a psychological perspective, if like now, almost better than ever, if you start to control some of these factors like your nutrition, you're going to feel a lot of a greater sense of security. It's just another aspect that you're going to have control over in your life. Like I know you and me, like we've all had stuff pile up. Think about procrastination, how much stress that can put on you, feeling like you're in a pressure cooker. So even if you can alleviate some sort of stress in your life or a stressor by just being structured with your nutrition, fantastic.
Yeah.
You're going to feel like you can control that aspect of your life completely.
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of cases where you tell somebody to meal prep all their meals for the entire week. And basically the stuff that's going to last for 4 or 5 days, you can put in the fridge, and the rest of the stuff you freeze. And they're like, it's the least stressed I've ever been about food, because I literally cook once a week. I go into the fridge. I know that I eat 4 of those meals.
No decision fatigue.
There's zero decision about what to cook. You just have to plan it out. Sometimes planning is going to take like 2 to 4 hours the first time, just so you have a couple meal variations. Just to either hit macros or calories or whatever kind of methodology you're following. But once that's done, you don't have to think about it, and then it's a process of, am I hungry or am I craving something? Because if you're like, well, I don't want to eat the meal that's in my fridge, then it's probably a craving, unless you've been, like, don't get me wrong, if you've been eating the same thing for like 6 months, you might get sick of it. But at the same time, like, you just have to get a little bit creative with your decisions, and that will never actually come up. And then you just kind of like get into that role and you just roll with it. Like, it gets pretty easy at that point.
Yeah, and I guess the research on habits, just now we start to understand it does take a little bit more time, and the further those ingrained.
It's definitely not 21 days.
No, it's a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
And again, like if you're working with a coach like myself or Anthony, like if we can install, and well, this is actually another segue, is like you kind of have to unlearn and then relearn, or uninstall and then install habits. Think about your kind of brain as an operating PC where there's, you know, there's windows and tabs open, you got to close some and you got to open a few. So I think if you can understand, and this is a skill I wish they taught in school, they never taught you really how to change a habit.
Yeah.
And as you get older, it gets a lot more challenging. But, you know, in 12 weeks, if you can, you know, change or improve on like 2 to 3 habits and kind of, you know, emphasize on making those stick, is that makes a complete difference with the way that you approach your nutrition long term. So,
yeah,
I'm sure you work a lot with habits.
Yeah, that's 95% of what I do on a daily basis when I'm chatting with my clients. A lot of times, setting like little challenges or goals just for like a couple days or a couple weeks to try to create a new pattern, something different.
Yeah. And like I'm again, another misconception about, you know, coaching is we're just completely hard or, you know, very difficult on our clients if they're not doing what they're, you know, told to do. It's like it's just such a combination of, you know, praising for, you know, good things and then just creating self-awareness around bad choices.
Yeah.
So I guess that was the answer to one question. I don't know how long that was.
I'm not really sure what the question was.
Yeah. How did we get here? How long was that? If you guys like this, obviously you guys can share it because I'm going to be putting up on IGTV. You guys can comment and hopefully this generates some further questions. For people watching this could be, I would say, actually quite good for coaches.
Yeah.
If anything that we talked about today, I feel like if you're a coach with nutrition, this would be quite valuable for you. Just to even take your brain over about some ideas and some things you can implement on coaching general population clients. And yeah, if you guys, hopefully this answered the question about gaining weight and motivation in quarantine.
Yeah. So, yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And
what was the name of the segment?
The segment is called, oh no.
Two guys, 2 pillows, barricaded between 2 pillows.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Social distancing with 2 pillows. Okay.